There will be two stories here. The first one super creepy, and the second more sad, more of an explanation as to why I no longer participate. I grew up seeing ghosts, so the whole topic of spirits wasn't new to me. However, I was so scared by them that around the time I was around 7 or 8, when the energetic system starts to be solely individualized, I never talked about it with friends as my family never believed me, so I assumed they wouldn't either. The first story takes us back to the 2000s. I was a little girl celebrating my friend's birthday. She always had a Halloween party to celebrate because that's when her birthday happened to be. She always talked about how her basement felt weird and she didn't like staying down there alone. Well, having 10 or so 10-year-old girls sleep over on Halloween night isn't exactly bedroom material, so her mom and grandma set us up in the basement. There we played those weird games like light as a feather, stiff as a board and stuff. Fun fact, I was the only one we successfully levitated. I remember opening my eyes and I was damn near the ceiling. It was spooky. When some of us started to get tired, we brought out the Ouija board. A few of our friends were spooked, so they didn't want to participate. We asked innocent questions like kids usually do. Who is the birthday girl going to marry? How old are we going to be when we have kids? Stuff like that. I remember I asked a question about myself and it replied, dead, which was weird. Some of the girls got spooked even more by that. Then a girl screamed and said she saw something behind me in the mirror. We stopped after that. For a few hours, 3 of us, including me and the birthday girl, couldn't sleep. We weren't sure if the board was real or not, so we decided to try one more time while everyone else was asleep, thinking that since they didn't want to play, it'd be better that way. We were close to 3 a.m. What we heard is the witching hour. Remember here that we are about 10 or 11 years old, dumb, and have no idea what we're doing or who we're talking to. We asked the board if it could do something for us. We set it 3:15 a.m. to have the girl who saw something in the mirror wake up and say something to us. It was over 15 years ago, so I don't remember what we asked the girl to say. All I know is we asked for her to look in the mirror and say it. 3:15 a.m. was about 20 or so minutes from when we asked the question. I remember us saying goodbye to the board and putting it away. The 3 of us were talking about how impossible our ask was when 3:15 a.m. hit. We knew it hit 3:15 a.m. because her basement had a big grandfather clock that didn't ring anymore, but the clock function still worked. We were waiting and waiting, and right before the time changed to 3:16 a.m., it happened. This girl shot straight up out of her blankets and looked straight at the mirror with her eyes closed. She whispered what we asked her to say, then dropped to her pillow like nothing ever happened. We all just looked at each other, frozen. No other girl that was sleeping stirred. None of them moved, not 1 centimeter. We were so freaked out that we didn't sleep until the sun came up, and in October in the Midwest, that's pretty late. We got 3 hours of sleep tops that night. This was my first ever Ouija board experience, and that changed the way I viewed spirits forever. I still think about it and feel guilty that I basically asked for one of my friends to be possessed. Needless to say, don't ever do that. Our second story comes in nearly a decade after the first. I was a senior in high school, and one of my cheermates invited the whole team over to celebrate her birthday. I didn't know it, but she had a Ouija board. She brought it out and I said, nope, not a good idea. I guess her grandma had just died and she was really torn up about it. I was very adamant that this wasn't a good idea and that we don't know if what we're talking to would be her grandma or not. She promised me she'd just try it twice and then she'd put it away. By this time, I knew a lot more than I did back during my first experience. I told her that she must say goodbye each time the girls rotated, and I had them put salt around the board to keep whatever they were talking to inside the board, and so no one would or could get possessed. They tried it at least 4 times with different girls each time, and the planchette didn't move even once. They all laughed at me for how scared I acted earlier, saying that the board is stupid and doesn't actually work. I got kind of annoyed because some of them knew about my experience. I had shared it to the few who were already hesitant about the board when it was brought out. I said, "You know what? I'll do it, and I'll prove to everyone here that these boards are real." It was me, the birthday girl, who was a class below me, and 2 other girls from my class who only joined the team for our senior year. We put our fingers on the planchette and did the 3 circles to begin. I asked who we were talking to, and the planchette moved for the first time that night. The 2 girls in my class were huge skeptics. They said, of course it would move when I just said I'll prove it's real. They accused me of moving it, but the information that came out was information I never knew until they connected the dots for me. The board first goes to the letter J, then to the letter R. We were all confused because JR isn't a name, or a name of anyone we knew, or so we thought. We then asked why they were here, and the board spelled friend. We asked again, who is this? And the board spelled JR. We then asked, what does J stand for? And the board spelled out JONAT. And one of the girls from my class screamed, no way. We all looked at her in confusion. She asked, is this Jonathan Raymond? The planchette immediately moved to yes. The 2 girls sat so quietly, and we just waited. The birthday girl asked who JR was, and the girls started to explain. JR was a guy who was in the class above me. I knew of him, but nothing about him personally. I had been cheering at our school all 4 years, so I knew him from the football team. That was about all I knew of him. He had passed our sophomore year, his junior year, due to his car's exhaust. He didn't want to wake his parents after driving home from a party in the middle of winter, so he slept in his car with the car on in the garage. His parents found him the next morning. I remember it totally ripped apart his class. I remember his friends not showing up to school for at least 2 weeks out of grief, and we had a big celebration on the football field in the spring. Back to the Ouija board situation. The 2 girls in my class were panicked. They looked at me weird, and I said, well, it must be him coming through. They said no, that's impossible because the board doesn't work, and that I'm making all this up and moving the planchette. They said I was a horrible person for impersonating JR, and I said I wasn't, because I truly wasn't. I said, let's keep going and see what comes up. I knew they were friends of his and could validate the information that comes through. They reluctantly agreed and feverishly asked a few more questions. They asked what his football number was. The planchette moved to 2 numbers, and the 2 girls were in shock. I looked at them questioningly, because again, I didn't know this about him. It had been 2 years since he passed, and I had no idea what his number was. I couldn't even remember which number the assigned player I had a few months before had. Then they asked what color car he had. The board answered red, which was true. At least I remember the picture they had for his celebration was him in his red car because he loved the car. Then they asked who his best friend was, and I definitely had absolutely zero idea who that would be. Again, we had similar friends. We were at the same places at the same time occasionally, but I never once spoke to this guy, and our mutuals didn't really talk to me about him because we didn't really have anything in common other than friends and the football cheerleader type of association. The board spelled out his best friend's name. The guy was the only guy in our school with that first name, but we asked for the last name just to see if it would spell it correctly, and it did. The girls didn't even say goodbye. They flung the board at me. They called me a liar, saying I made all this up. They were sobbing and screaming at me. It made me so uncomfortable. I was nothing but the tuner, the instrument which opened the veil for them, and they thought I was an awful person. The whole team fell silent, and I just left due to the discomfort. Even though I had been captain of our team and had cheered with the majority of those girls for at least 3 years, the majority of them didn't talk to me, even at practice, for at least 2 weeks. So many of them thought I was either crazy or disgusting. Only a few of them understood that I wouldn't have known that based on who I was friends with at school and who I actually hung out with. JR and I never truly crossed paths for conversation until that night, if it was actually him, that is. I think it was, but I do know that spirits can pretend to be someone and read our thoughts and memories with them. I don't use Ouija boards anymore because you never know who you're going to get or who you're going to piss off, even if it works. Now, I'm a practicing energy reader and medium, so all of this type of stuff in my life has taught me how to further connect in a safe way behind the veil. This has happened to me many years ago, which is about spiritualism via playing with a Ouija board. When I was about 15 years old, some childhood friends and I were quite fascinated with paranormal things like ghosts, private base phenomena such as UFOs, etc. We would sometimes venture out to such places to try to encounter things. Mind you, we are talking about the mid to late 90s when intelligent phones did not exist, but digital gadgets were on the cusp of breakthrough. Anyways, one day a friend and I, during summer vacation, decided to get a Ouija board and go to another best friend's house to play with it. Everything went according to plan. In the morning we met up, obtained a Ouija board from a local supermarket, and went to our friend's house in the neighborhood we all grew up in. We gathered in his bedroom, turned the lights off, lit a couple candles, and asked it questions. It moved slightly, but never really got any type of full-on encounter or experience. So we said whatever, and continued the day hanging out and enjoying each other's company during summer vacation. Typical teenage summer vacation fun. But this is where the crazy stuff began. Around a week or so later, I was at my house laying down in my bed in my bedroom around 8 p.m. I was just laying down, relaxing, listening to music. Then all of a sudden, I heard footsteps run up my bedroom wall outside of the house and then run across the roof quite quickly. Now, my bed was against the wall, and I literally heard the footsteps run up the same wall outside of where my bed was against, and it sounded like a child running quickly. That was the length and span of each step, and it sounded like the entity was bipedal and running really fast. I then was quite surprised and didn't know what to do. I then went to the kitchen where my mom was washing the dishes, and I asked if my stepdad was on the roof doing some type of maintenance, and my mom was surprised at the questions and said, "No, he's not up on the roof." I then returned to my room and thought about it for a while. Eventually I forgot about it. Shortly after, I recall late at night, when everyone was asleep, I would suddenly feel fear out of nowhere in my room and suddenly get paralyzed. It was crazy because when I felt the fear, it felt like a super fast rush of wind would race towards me and fill me, enter my being, and I would be paralyzed. My eyes rolled back all the way, and it was a level of fear and rage I cannot describe in human words that would fill my whole being. Such incidents would begin to happen about once a week and evolved to 2 to 3 times a week for about 4 years throughout high school. Then it got to a point where one night I sensed the same fear enter my room while my whole family was asleep in their respective rooms. And again, such entity rushed and entered my body. My body arched, and then I felt myself levitate to the ceiling where my nose almost touched the ceiling. Then my body slowly returned back to the bed. I remember feeling everything and being able to see everything even though my eyes were rolled back in the back of my eye sockets. I was able to feel the bed sheets over my body and hanging, and I was able to see how I was levitating nearer to the ceiling and everything. There was another incident where the same thing happened, and while I was paralyzed in such state, I remember using all my force and energy and moved my head towards the door of my bedroom. Because while I was paralyzed, it was super hard to move any part of my body, let alone my mouth to scream for help or anything. And after looking at the bedroom door in an attempt to run and escape such horrifying experience, I mustered up as much energy and motivation as possible, and I tried leaping off my bed to run for the door. What I'm about to describe is unbelievable, but I'm speaking from first-hand experience. And my inner self, soul or spirit, jumped out of my body and I hit the floor. I then started crawling to the door and was going to reach for the doorknob, but then I looked back to the bed and saw my body paralyzed with my eyes rolled back. I couldn't believe it. Then all of a sudden, my soul, spirit, rushed back to my body and the entity left my body. The word terrifying does not begin to describe what one feels in such experiences. There were other nights where my mom, stepdad, and siblings would go grocery shopping at night, and I would stay at home watching TV. And while in the living room, I would hear about 15 to 20 feet away from the living room, down the hall where the 3 bedrooms of the house were, I would hear one doorknob of one of the rooms turning and letting go, turning and letting go. Obviously, no one was in the house, and I would feel a presence back there, but did not dare to go investigate. I remember calling one of my best friends on the phone to distract my attention from that. Also, when those things were happening, every time I laid down on my bed sideways at night, with my back facing the room and my face towards the wall, I would always hear people whispering in the room right behind me, and when I turned around to see, the whispers would stop. It would happen so much that I stopped laying down sideways to sleep, or if I did, my face would be towards the room and my back would be against the wall. I can describe so many more experiences, but I would have to turn this into a book with chapters. Thankfully, years have passed. I'm a full-grown man now, and those experiences and entities have dwindled away. I started going to church and it all faded away. To conclude, my word of advice is never dabble with the Ouija board. My parents would never allow a real Ouija board in the house when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s. Sex, drugs, and violence were fine as entertainment, but my seemingly unreligious parents had this weird distance between anything occult, or what they would call satanic. So I'm maybe 14, mid-90s, hanging out with my band, who was two guys that didn't know how to play instruments like me, and we just hung out and daydreamed about being rock stars. Think Wild Stallions from Bill and Ted. We got on the subject of witchcraft and Ouija boards came up. I had the idea to make one after hearing from the goth chick on the bus that they could be more powerful that way. I got a rectangle of cardboard and made the most crude Ouija board I could from memory. The other guys had only seen them in the stores like me, so we just kind of put things on as we remembered them. So we made a little planchette out of some thicker cardboard and got to seancing. We asked the standard, "Are you there?" questions. The planchette moved and we got answers that made no sense. Seemingly random letters and a few numbers that didn't form words or anything meaningful. We all assumed one of us was sabotaging the whole thing. Then I asked if there was anything we could do to help us understand. With zero hesitation, the planchette darted to the moon and then just as quickly over to the sun image. It felt like we all almost lost our place on the planchette because it was definitely moving on its own. And then it slowly spelled out DESREVER before making 3 quick circles around the center of the cardboard counterclockwise and darting to goodbye. We all kind of sat there with our mouths open for a minute. Bass player said, "I only remembered to write down the last letters it gave us. What does DESREVER mean?" Me, being a first-year French language student, thought it said Des Revere, and I confidently assumed it meant the rivers, but I knew I had no clue. Then keyboard player says, "Guys, DESREVER is reversed in reverse. What the fuck?" We left to see for ourselves if we had the sun and moon reversed, and walked downtown to the nearest department store. Sure enough, the one we made was damn near perfect to the one in the store, except one major detail. The sun and the moon were indeed incorrectly placed on my homemade Ouija board. We ran home promptly and burnt it in the fireplace. F that, never again.